Always makes me laugh. Otherwise, I look too sullen, I guess. Today, I want to bring a sermon on my least favorite topic. This used to be Elder Gerald's least favorite topic as well, but from time to time we have to do this. And he used to call this his annual giving sermon, and would preach it about every 18 months. It's been a little over 2 years since I preached it, and this is not going to be the full thing. I'm not going to stretch this thing out like I've had to do in the past. This is a booster shot. You know how if you have a puppy, you take them to the vet and they give them a shot, and then you got to take them back 6 months later and they get a booster? Well, this is a booster shot. We're going to hit some of the high points and move on. Now, I need to say this. When I was a kid, I don't know if I guess they still make this stuff. I thought they'd outlawed it, but I guess they still make it. When I was a kid, my mom had a bottle of mercurochrome. Some of you probably remember that orange stuff that you put on scrapes. You'd fall down and scrape your knees or scrape your elbow, and you'd go in the house crying, and she'd put mercurochrome, that orange stuff, on there, and that stung worse than the scrape. It hurt worse than the pain that you went in there crying about. And Mom would always say, that's just the medicine doing the work, okay? For a lot of you, and a lot of the folks out there, this is going to wash off you like nothing. You're not going to think anything about it. For some of you, it might sting. If it stings, that's just the medicine doing the work. Don't be like a former member that we had and decide to shoot the messenger. I'm just reading from the Word of God. And I've also had a lot of experience with this. And if anyone has ever tried to work the system, you're looking at somebody that has tried to work the system. I've tried to work this every possible way that I could until I finally had to humble myself and say, okay, God, you're right. This is the only thing that works. And so what I'm going to preach on this morning is how a Christian can survive financially in this world. Now, I alluded to this last week, and I made the point, I'm going to prove it this morning, that the financial systems of this world are not set up by God, they're set up by the devil. And if you think you're going to get along by following his system after you've come out, announced yourself to be a Christian, joined a New Testament church, yeah, you're his enemy. And if God doesn't stand between you and him, he will crush you like a bug. The last thing you want to do is get into a situation where God backs off. Because as we're going to see in the Bible, there are times when God will back off, and he will let the devil have his way with you. And you don't want to go there. You really don't. You want all the protection that you can get from God in this area. So first off, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 4, and I want you to see something. These are words that Satan told Jesus Christ. And I want you to notice that Christ does not contradict him. Christ does not say, no, not at all. Because what the devil said is absolutely true. This is during the temptation, after the baptism, 40 days in the wilderness, and then the temptation. And in Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 through 10, again the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and saith unto him, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. And notice Jesus doesn't say, no, Jesus says, then saith Jesus unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. The devil's in control down here. He's usurped the authority of this world from Adam when he sinned in the Garden of Eden. These kingdoms that we see, these governmental systems that we see, this is his system. You're not going to make it in this system by following his rules. He doesn't like you. Okay? It's that simple. He does not like you. He wants to destroy you. The only chance you've got is to follow what we read over in Proverbs chapter 3. Because this is you just saw the problem. Here's the cure. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 through 10. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. This word increase, it comes from the Hebrew tabua, which means income, produce, fruit, gain, increase, revenue. From your income. We had a church member, a non-resident member, call me one time and asked me if she had to pay on a life insurance policy. If that was something that she had to support the church with, I told her no. That's not income, right? That's an insurance policy. You paid for the insurance policy for however many years, now you're collecting on the insurance. That's not income to you. Now, if you take that money and invest it and receive income from it, that you pay on. But the increase is from your income or from your profit, if you will. It's much the same as, you know, you consider this is one of these things that people just, I guess it's good in political speeches, but it doesn't make any sense. Some of these democratic socialists nowadays are claiming that they're going to increase the tax rate on the wealthy to, some say 70%, some say 90%. How many of you actually think that Warren Buffett gets a W-2 at the end of the year? Wealthy people don't have income. We don't tax wealth here, we tax income. And if you don't have income, you don't pay income tax, right? These guys have very, very little income that they have to pay tax on. They live off their wealth, right? If I have $7 billion in a savings account and I withdraw $10 million a month, I don't pay tax on that. That's savings. I already paid tax on that. That's wealth. We don't tax that. So when you hear all these statements about taxing the rich, that's just hyperbole. And it's the same way here. You pay on income. You don't pay on wealth. Okay? If you inherit, let's say you inherit a tract of land somewhere, you're not required to sell that land and pay 10% on it. But if that land produces income, then you pay on the income. We have people that get involved in investments. Sometimes we have people that will make loans to other people. Okay, well, you make a loan to somebody and they pay you back principal and interest. You don't pay on the principal. You already paid on that, but you pay on the interest because that's the income. Okay, so this is based on increase. That makes sense? Okay. The next word I want you to zero in on, and this is an important one, the word first fruits. First fruits. This comes from the Hebrew reshith, the first in place, time, order, or rank. Specifically a first fruit, beginning, chief, first, principal thing. First fruits. Now that's going to become extremely important as we move forward. You pay first fruits. Okay? Now I want to read a couple of quotes because this is nothing new, folks. This is really nothing new. This is well known by everybody, even in churches that we don't agree with. They teach the same thing. You're going to hear this from everybody. You go look at a Larry Burkett book, you're going to see the same thing in his financial advice that you're going to hear here. You look at, what's the other guy, Ramsey, same thing. Everybody. This is nothing new, and the reason it's nothing new is because, folks, it works. It actually works. If you'll follow it, it works. And people that have done it and done it consistently and long enough to realize that they've gone through a test and passed the test will tell you it works. It's the only way that a Christian can have any financial security in this world. Remember, you're working against the enemy in the system. If you try to work his system and God lets you do it, good luck. You're going to struggle for the rest of your life. Now, we have free will in this regard. Okay? It's not an excludable offense. I can't bring you up on charges. But I hate to see people struggle. I really do. And if you want to struggle, struggle. But I'm giving you the key to how not to, if you'll heed it. Okay? And most of you do anyway, so This is for those few out there that don't. This is what John Gill said about this same passage. And with the first fruits of all thine increase, or out of the chief of all thine increase, God must have the best, and in the first place. The allusion is either to the maintenance of the priests and Levites under the law, and the manner of doing it, which among other things was out of the annual produce of the earth and the first fruits of it, and may respect the comfortable support of gospel ministers under the present dispensation. See 1 Corinthians 9, 13 through 14. So that's from John Gill. He wrote back in the 1700s, I believe. Another commentator, Matthew Poole, said this: honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase, with thy substance or with thy riches. Lay out thy estate not only to please and advance thyself or family, but also to glorify God, which is done by the payment of all those offerings and dues which God hath required, by giving according to thy abilities whatsoever is necessary for the support and advancement of God's worship and service in the world, by free and liberal contributions to those whom God hath made his deputies, and as I may say, the receivers of his rents, to wit, faithful ministers and good Christians, and all others who need and require thy help. The performance of these duties is here called an honoring of God, partly because that word is sometimes used for giving of gifts, as in 1 Timothy 5:17 and elsewhere, and partly because it is a testimony of our respects to God, of our obedience to him as our sovereign Lord, and that in hand and costly duties of our thankfulness to him as our chief benefactor and donor of all that we have, and of our beliefs of his promises made to the faithful practicers of that duty, which if they were believed, the most covetous persons would be the most charitable. That's interesting, isn't it? The ones that want to make the most, those that are most covetous, if they believed this, they would give more than anybody else. With the first fruits, or with the chief or best or fruit or first, which answers to the first fruits under the law. Verse 10, so shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. This is not the way to diminish thy estate, as covetous and profane persons allege, but rather to increase it. Shall burst out, shall be so filled that they would burst out if not carefully prevented. Okay? Another commentator, Matthew Henry. Many of you know who Matthew Henry is. He said, relative to the promise, a promise which makes it our interest to serve God with our estates, it is the way to make a little much and much more. It is the surest and safest method of thriving. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty. He does not say thy bags, but thy barns. Not thy wardrobe replenished, but thy presses. God shall bless thee with an increase of that which is for use, not for show or ornament, for spending and laying out, not for hoarding and laying up. Those that do good with what they have shall have more to do good with. Note, if we make our worldly estates serviceable to our religion, we shall find our religion very serviceable to the prosperity of our worldly affairs. Godliness has the promise of life that now is, and most of the comfort of it. We mistake if we think that giving will undo us and make us poor. No, giving for God's honor will make us rich. Haggai 2:19. And finally, Jameson Fawcett Brown says, so shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. So far from becoming poorer by giving to the Lord's honor out of thy substance, it is thus that thou shalt become abundantly enriched with all manner of meat and drink. So in Hezekiah's time, Azariah the high priest said, since the people began to bring the offerings into the house of the Lord, we have had enough to eat and have left plenty, and the Lord hath blessed his people, and that which is left is this great store. This is an odd thing, but it's true. And it works. And if you talk to somebody that's done it any length of time, they will tell you it works. It's the only way for a Christian to get by. Now, let's get to the Bible. The first passage I want you to turn to is Genesis chapter 4. Because a couple of things I want you to see here. This is the first example of an offering that was made to God, and I want you to see that it does in fact matter to Him. What you bring does in fact matter to Him. It makes a difference. This is not a case of bring whatever you want. This is a case of bring what God told you to bring. That's simple. Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 through 5. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. You see, it matters to God what you bring. God gave instruction to Adam of what you should bring. He gave that instruction to his sons, and one of them did it and one of them didn't. And we know what happened with Cain and Abel. So Abel did what God had told him to do through the prophet Adam. Cain didn't. And it mattered to God. It made a difference. The word offering is a noun. It means that which is presented in divine service, an animal or a portion of bread or corn or of gold and silver or of other valuable articles presented to God as an atonement for sin or as a return of thanks for His favors or for other religious purposes, a sacrifice, an oblation. When we give, we don't give in order to remit sins. We give out of thankfulness for the fact that He's already forgiven sins. Okay? It comes from the Hebrew. It means a gift. And we've got some passages. We don't need to turn to these passages. I'll give them to you. You can look at them later if you want. Genesis 32:14, 19 and 21. Genesis 43:11, 15, 25 and 26. A tribute, which was enacted from a tributary people under the milder name of a gift offered to a divinity, a sacrifice, especially a sacrifice without blood, opposed to a bloody sacrifice. So, the first act of worship that we see in the world was an offering to God. And it mattered to God what you offered. That's the point I wanted to make with Cain and Abel. That's all I want to do with that. Now let's move on. Let's look at Noah. What's the first thing that Noah did when he came off the ark? Genesis chapter 8, verses 18 through 20. And Noah went forth, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds went forth out of the ark. Now watch that. They just got off the boat. Okay? And Noah built it an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. The very first thing that Noah did when he came off the ark was gave an offering to God to thank Him for bringing him through what he just went through. You see, offerings are important. This is an example for us, folks. We're to offer to God to show Him that we care. That's important. Abraham, look at Genesis chapter 14 and verse 20. This is one of the two places where we get the idea of what we actually give. Now, I'm not going to say there's a hard, fast rule relative to this, because I don't know what the hard, fast rule is. I know that what Abraham gave is acceptable. I know what Jacob gave is acceptable. And for me, and for Elder Gerald, and Elder Mott, and Elder Wagner, and all the rest of us, that's good enough for us. I don't need any more proof than that. If Abraham did it, then that's what I'm going to do. And my suggestion is that you probably should do likewise, because that's what Abraham did, and that's what Jacob did. But there's no hard, fast rule that says you have to. If you want to play with a different number, play with a different number. I don't know what God expects, but I know what the example of Abraham was. Okay? So I follow the example of Abraham. You can follow what you want, but if it doesn't work for you, you might want to up it a little bit. Okay? Where I am, Genesis chapter 14 and verse 20. And let's go back a little bit here. Let's go back to verse 17. This is after Abraham had gone to war with some of the other kings. It says, and the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of a word I'm not going to try to pronounce, and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaven, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all. Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek, the priest of the Most High God. Now, a tithe means a tenth. He gave a tenth. Gave a tenth of all the spoils. And that's the rule that most of us follow. Now, it's not a hard, fast rule in the New Testament. I don't have a proof text to prove it. But it's what I've always done since I learned the lesson. And it's what all the other men of God do. And it's what most of y'all do. And it works. And it works. And notice, Melchizedek was a priest of the Most High God. And he came with bread and wine. Does that sound familiar at all? You see, Abraham was giving to support God's work in this world. And that's what you do when you put money in the box over there. You're not paying me. Okay, understand that. When you put something in the box over there, that's not for me. That's for God. You're giving to God, and God pays me. All right? Don't get into the situation of thinking that you're paying my salary, because you're not. You get into that idea and you'll be like that white-haired guy that wore a blue shirt all the time, and one of these days you'll be out of here. That's not the way to look at this. You're not paying me. You're being obedient to God when you put something in that box over there. Think of it in those terms. Now here's something from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia on this particular verse. It says, Abraham gave him tithes. The custom of giving a tenth part of the products of the land and of the spoils of war to priests and kings. It was a very ancient custom among most nations. That the Jews had this custom long before the institution of the Mosaic Law is shown by this passage, as well as Genesis 28:22, which we're going to look at in a minute. Which is the very next verse, that's the next verse in our outline. Many critics hold that these two passages are late and only reflect the later practice of the nation. But the payment of tithes is so ancient and deeply rooted in the history of the human race that it seems much simpler and more natural to believe that among the Jews the practice was in existence long before the time of Moses. You know, there's a book that when people ask me for financial advice, there's a book that I suggest that they get and read. It's not very big. It's a little bitty book called The Richest Man in Babylon. Now, this is not a Bible work. Obviously, Richest Man in Babylon, this is not. But you know what? You know what? One of the things that he says in there is the first thing you do off the top is you give 10% to, you set 10% aside for God. Then you put 10% aside for yourself. Because what's the purpose of working if you're not saving something for yourself? And then you live off the 80% that's left. If more people lived the way that my parents, you know, my mom and dad lived off about 60% of what they made, between 50 and 60% of what they made, that was their budget. If you live off of 50 or 60% of what you make, well, then you're living within your means, and what the heck's 10% to give to God? Is nothing. Especially with a promise that you'll do better in the end. Okay? Sometimes people have gotten themselves into a situation by following the teaching of the world and by trying to live in Satan's system, and they get themselves into a situation where it takes 99% of what they make in order to survive. Well, if you're in that situation, this is your only way out. Because otherwise, someday you'll see the inside of a federal bankruptcy court. Don't blame God because you were foolish with your credit. Don't blame him because you spent too much on a house or a car or a boat or whatever. That's not his fault. Okay? Now, Romans chapter 4 and verse 12, and this is the reason that I go back to Abraham. I look at what Abraham and I look at what Jacob did, and I think, okay, well, if they did that, then maybe I'm supposed to do that too. Okay? Romans chapter 4 and verse 12 says, "And the father of circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only," that would be me, I'm a Gentile, "but also who walk in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham, which he had, being yet uncircumcised." Walking in the steps of our father Abraham. What did Abraham do? I want to do the same thing. Now, I don't want to sacrifice myself. Of course, he didn't have to actually sacrifice. I don't want to do some of the stupid things he did. But when it came to the godly things he did, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to walk in the steps of our father Abraham. I want to do the same things. I want to learn from him. I want to see what he did and then apply those rules in my life if I can, because it worked for him, and it'll probably work for me as well, because God gave the same promises. Now, look at Genesis chapter 28. This is a verse that we just read about over in the quote that I just read. And now we're going to talk about Jacob. Genesis chapter 28 and verse 22. Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to verse 20. "And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God, and this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee." That's the example of Jacob. And that's where we derive this idea of 10% money. In fact, I think that's what Elder Gerald used to always refer to it as, 10% money. You know, if he had a call that he had to make to bring some money in to help somebody, take it out of your 10% money. That's where we get the 10% from. It's where everybody gets the 10% from. Okay? So Jacob promised to give God a 10th of all. And I want you to notice something. We're going to look at some verses here. Let me make the statements first, and then I'll prove them with the Bible verses. Blessings to us. Remember, we read over in Proverbs. Blessings to us are conditioned upon our being careful in giving the Lord, and giving to the Lord as well as others, and that we're to honor God with the first fruits, right? We spent some time defining first fruits. If you give to God what's left over, after you sit down with your budget and you figure out how much you have coming in, and then you figure out how much you got left over at the end of the month, if you give that to God, you're not giving him first fruits. You're giving him leftovers. Does that make sense? You're not walking by faith, you're walking by sight. You see how much I got left, and so, well, that's what I'll give you, what I got left over, God. Is that what Jacob said? No. That's not first fruits, folks. That's leftovers. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7 says, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." Don't walk by sight. The promise of blessings from God. Let's go back and look at this again. Proverbs chapter 3. And I realize this is a common thing that people get involved in, and I'm going to explain how it happens here in a few minutes. And it's a test. If you didn't know it, it's a test. Now, once you figure out what the answer key says, once you know whether the answer to the question is A, B, C, or D on a multiple choice, it's pretty easy to pass the test, right? But if you don't know what the answer is, and sometimes you don't even realize it's a test, well, you might fail it. And when you fail it, well, then you get yourself into trouble. So I'm going to give you the answer key today, and I'm going to tell you how to pass the test. When the test comes along, I'll tell you how to pass it. Then it's up to you whether or not you want to pass the test or fail it. Your call. Free will. Okay? Proverbs chapter 3, 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase, so shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. I want you to notice something. This promise of blessings applies to first fruits. It does not apply to leftovers. God wants you to walk by faith, not by sight. That's extremely important. I want you to look at something else. Look at Nehemiah chapter 13. Nehemiah is way back in the historical books, right after Ezra, which is after the Chronicles. Nehemiah chapter 13. Verses 10 through 12. And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them. For the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled everyone to his field. You say, what in the world does that mean? That means that at this time, you remember, if you go back and look at the history, the Levites were not given the same inheritance that everyone else was given. They were the priests. And so they were supported by the efforts of the other people. That's where the tithes went. It went to pay the Levites, the priests. So when all these collection came in, the Levites, they weren't required to go out and work in the field because they received the tithes from the people that did work in the field. And that's the way that God has always arranged his system to work. The minister lives off of those who work for a living. Okay, but notice what's happened. He perceived that the portions of the Levites hadn't been given to him because the Levites, they're out there working in the field. They're having to do their own, they're having to work in a secular job in order to eat because the people aren't supporting them. Then contended I with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? Consider that. You don't support the minister, God says you've forsaken the house of God. This is serious to him. This is really serious to him. And this is why he will back off if people don't do it. Why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place, then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil under the treasuries. You see, he warned them, and they woke up. Okay? But God considers that a forsaking of his house. Now I want you to turn to Haggai. Haggai is a tiny little book. It's over in the prophetical books. It's right in between Zephaniah and Zechariah, if that helps you at all. It's only about 2 pages long. But I want you to see that God will withhold blessings from his people if they are careless or negligent with respect to providing for his house. And remember, not supporting ministers, you're forsaking his house. If you're negligent to his house, God withholds blessings from you. Okay? If it stings, it's just the medicine doing the work. Okay? Haggai chapter 1, verses 4 through 11. Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? See, they weren't building the temple. They weren't doing the work that they were sent to do. Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Ye have sown much, and bring in little. You eat, but you have not enough. You drink, but you're not filled with drink. You clothe you, but there's none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes. You go out and you work and work and work and work, and you never can get ahead. You don't have any savings. You don't have anything to fall back on. And every month there's more month than there is money. That's what's being described here. Why? Because they're not careful to take care of God's house. Now here's the test. This is let me read a little bit more. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountain and bring wood and build the house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, saith the Lord. Let me give you the test, and then we'll continue on with this. This is how it works. Everything's sliding along just fine, and everything's going hunky-dory, and all of a sudden, one month, some unexpected bill shows up. I don't know, you open the back of your car and a load of tile falls on your foot and breaks your ankle and sends you to the hospital. Right? Or you did something foolish and you went out and you bought a brand new Mercedes-Benz, and now all of a sudden you can't afford the car payment. Or you ran a credit card all the way up to the balance and now you can't make the bills. Okay? What do? This is the test, folks. It happens to every one of us. Now you got two ways of answering this test, and one of them is horrible and the other one's right. The first way you answer it is by looking at this and thinking, you know what, if I can make this payment, I just can't give God what I ordinarily would give God. Can't give him first fruits. I can give him maybe half of what I would normally give him, and then I can pay the bill. Okay? And that's the way that a lot of people will do it, and you just fail the test. Because you know what happens the next month? There's even less. And now you can't give God anything because you got to pay the bill. And then after a few months or a few years, you don't even have enough to pay the bill with, and you haven't given anything to God in a year and a half. And you failed the test because you're walking by sight. You're not walking by faith. Now, there are a couple of messages that you're sending to God if you do this. Ready for the mercurochrome? This one's going to sting. How long do you think I would stay married if I told my lovely wife, Wendy, that there was another woman in the world that was more important to me than her, other than my mom? What do you think? Would that be a good course of action? Do you think I'd be a happy husband if I sent that message to my wife? Do you realize you're sending that same message to God when you do that? Think about that. God, my FICO score is more important to me than you are. This car that I bought is more important to me than you are. Because I'm going to pay it and I ain't going to pay you. Is it stinging yet? How about this one? You know, God, you might be able to raise the dead. You might be able to create the universe by speaking it into existence. I believe that, but you can't help me with my car payment. Can't help me pay the light bill. It's not a very flattering approach, is it? Or really what you're saying is, I simply don't trust you or your promises to take care of me. I can do this better by myself. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6, it says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Let me tell you a couple of stories. These are all true, by the way, and they're verifiable if you want to verify them. The first one comes from a non-resident member that lives out west. I'm not going to mention names. They'll know who they are when they hear this. Got a phone call one time, and they were struggling with the idea of whether or not they could actually send the money to me because of some unexpected bills that had popped up. See, it's a classic test. And I didn't really steer them in any particular direction. I just talked to them. Well, lo and behold, they sent it. They sent what they had slated for God's money, and they sent it anyway, knowing that they weren't going to be able to pay the bill. About 2 months later, I heard back from them that, lo and behold, about a week after they had sent the money, a job showed up for the exact amount of money that they needed to pay that bill with. And so they are convinced that God was involved in that. Folks, He was. Honor the Lord with the first fruits of all thine increase, so shall thy barns be filled with plenty. You don't think God can cover your dental bills, or your vision bills, or your breaking your ankle bills, or your... This is the God that created the universe. You don't think He can help you scrape up $200 if you need it at the end of the month? Elder Gerald will tell you a story about a time when he and Mary Dell were on the road that he used to preach appointments. And the Primitive Baptists are really bad about supporting ministers. They're more interested in building retaining walls than they are in retaining ministers. It's one of the reasons that we're not part of that denomination. But he was on this trip, and he'll tell you this if you talk to him. I don't remember the exact amount of money, but I remember the story. That they were short some money in paying the rent or the house payment or whatever it was, and they stopped by to visit with an old friend on their way home. And I'm going to choke up. The old friend immediately, and some of you have heard this story, the old friend immediately hollered at his secretary and said, "Hey, that check that we were going to mail to Elder Gerald, bring that in here and let's just give it to him. We don't need to mail it, he's here." And it was for the exact amount of money that he needed to make that payment. You see, again, honor the Lord with the first fruits, so shall thy barns be filled. There was a time when Wendy and I moved down here that I couldn't pay the rent. We were a couple of $100 short on paying the rent. And Sunday had come and gone, and I was short a couple of $100 on paying the rent. Rent was due on Friday. So I had choices. I have an envelope at home that I keep church money in, and that church money is used to pay for travel expenses and other expenses of the church, but that's all it's ever used for. There was money in that envelope. I could have taken that money and paid the rent, but that would be stealing from God. So I took the money out of the box and I put 10% back in the envelope for church money, like I always do, and I got down on my knees and I said, "I need help. I'm short. Sorry, I got rent due." That Thursday afternoon when the mail delivered, there was an envelope there from some address somewhere in Arizona. An address that I don't know who this person is. I don't have a clue. But I remember the envelope, and I opened it, and it had enough cash in it for me to put back 10% and pay the rent. Be faithful. That's how you pass the test. If you don't pass the test, you end up in what I like to refer to as a financial death spiral. Because it will just get worse and worse and worse and worse. And if you ever get into that, there's only one way out of it. Well, there's two ways out of it. One, you can go bankrupt and lose everything you got. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to hang on to the stuff you got, there's only one way out. And that's found right here in the remainder of this passage in Haggai chapter 1. Let's continue to read. We just finished at verse 8. You looked for much, and lo, it came to little. Have you ever thought about that one? Well, right around the corner, I've got this settlement coming, and I'll be able to catch up on that one, God. I can't pay you this month, but next month I've got this deal coming together that's going to help, right? And then it never seems to come to pass. Those deals somehow go away. You looked for much, and lo, it came to little. And when you brought it home, I did blow upon it. All of this that you thought I'm going to be able to get out from underneath this quagmire turns into nothing because you didn't do it the way you're supposed to do it. First fruits, not leftovers. Why, saith the Lord of hosts? Why did this happen? Because of mine house that is waste, and you run every man unto his own house. See, you're taking care of your own business, but you're not taking care of God's. That's what these people were doing. Now watch what happens. Therefore, the heaven over you is stayed from dew, and the earth is stayed from her fruit. And I called for a drought upon the land, and upon the mountains, and upon the corn, and upon the new wine, and upon the oil, and upon that which the ground bringeth forth, and upon men, and upon cattle, and upon all the labor of the hands. You see, that's where this financial death spiral comes from. You don't take care of God's house, and the next thing you know, it just one after another problem, another bill, another something, and you never can get out of it until you do what you have to do. Verse 12. Then Zerubbabel, the son of I'm not going to say it, and Joshua, the son of Josedek, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the words of Haggai the prophet, as the Lord their God had sent him, and the people did fear before the Lord. That's how you get out of it. You say, okay, God, I'll do it your way. I'll do it your way. And there's an interesting thing about that. I want you to turn to Malachi. Malachi is in the Old Testament. It's the last book of the Old Testament. And there's a couple of points in here that I really want you to see. First off, Malachi chapter 1, verses 6 through 14. And this is important to notice, folks. This is an important one. A son honoreth his father, and a servant his master. If I then be a father, where's mine honor? And if I be a master, where is my fear? Saith the Lord of hosts unto you, O priests that despise my name. And you say, wherein have we despised thy name? Ye offer polluted bread upon mine altar, and ye say, wherein have we polluted thee? In that you say the table of the Lord is contemptible. God had requirements for his sacrifices, remember? You weren't to bring anything that was lame, or that was halt, or that was blind, or that was wounded. You were to bring the best, the first fruits. God demands the first fruits. He demands the best from you. He only died for your miserable soul, and he demands the best. And watch what these guys are doing. Verse 8, and if you offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? Bring me a sheep that's blind. And if you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee? Or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? And now I pray you, beseech God that he will be gracious unto us. This hath been by your means. Will he regard your persons, saith the Lord of hosts? Who is there even among you that would shut the doors for naught? Neither do ye kindle fire on mine altar for naught. I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord of hosts. Neither will I accept an offering at your hand. If you're not going to bring God the best, don't bring him anything at all. Don't waste your time. He won't accept it. You bring him the best, or just stay home. For from the rising of the sun, even unto the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. And in every place incense shall be offered unto my name, and a pure offering for my name shall be great among the heathen, saith the Lord of hosts. You see that? He expects the best. He doesn't expect leftovers. He's not happy with leftovers. He wants first fruits, and the promise is he'll take care of you if you give him first fruits. No promise of taking care of you if you don't. Look at Malachi chapter 3, verses 7 through 9. Even from the days of your fathers ye are gone away from mine ordinances and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But you say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. See, they weren't bringing the tithes and offerings to the house. God refers to that as being robbed by them. They're stealing from him. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. Now watch this. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. You don't believe me? Do it anyway and prove me. There's the challenge. Prove that what I'm telling you isn't the truth. You know, there's not one person that I've ever met that follows this that will say that God didn't provide. Not one. All the people that say that won't work are the same people that have never done it or failed the first time they had a test. Everyone I have ever met that has done this and done it religiously will tell you this is the only way for a Christian to have any financial security in this world. It's the only way out. Now, we've got some time. Let's consider how often giving is mentioned in the New Testament. Look at Matthew chapter 2. And let me say one other thing. And this is important. It's not hard to do the math. I'm not going to do the math for you. I'll do it individually if somebody wants me to, but I'm not going to announce it on the internet. That doesn't seem fitting to me. But you know, when it comes to this 10% money that you lay by your side, you don't have to put it all in the box. For some people, it's easier just to put it in the box, but you don't have to put it all in the box. But what you don't put in the box is not yours. It is God's money, and you are the steward over God's money. So if you've got a pile of 10% money laying there and your microwave oven goes out, figure out another way to pay for it. Don't steal it from God's money. That's His money. And it's laying there so that if I have to come before you and ask for people to bring in money to help somebody with a health issue or with a major ordeal that they're going through, you already have it laying by your side. You don't have to go raise it. It's already there. So whatever it is that you've got, what goes in the box, you don't have to worry about that. That's my responsibility. What doesn't go in the box that's God's money, you keep that by your side. That's God's money. Don't use it for personal business. That's His money. Okay? That's important to understand. Whatever that might be. Let's see, where am I here? Okay. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 2. I want you to notice this. We're talking about giving gifts as being a part of worship. Okay, all right? When we worship, part of worship is giving. All right? Matthew chapter 2, verse 2 is talking about the wise men that came from the east. And they're talking to Herod, and they say, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." Their purpose is to come to worship him. You see that, right? Look at verse 11. And let's notice how they worshiped him. "And when they were come into the house," that's interesting, isn't it? Not manger. Into the house. By the time the wise men got there, Christ was already 2 years old. And they weren't living in a stable anymore. They were living in a house. And he wasn't an infant anymore. He was a young child. And that's the reason that Herod decided to kill all of the babies from 2 years old and younger. See, they didn't show up on Christmas Eve, folks. They showed up after he had already been born and Mary and Joseph were living in a house. Verse 11, when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother and fell down and worshiped him, right? That's why they came. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Giving gifts is part of worship. That's how these people worshiped him. They gave of their treasure to God. You see the picture? Matthew chapter 6, and this is extremely important. Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. Folks, that's why we have a box over there. That's why we don't pass a plate. You see, if you pass a plate, maybe not everybody sees what you gave, but the guy sitting next to you sure as heck did. Primitive Baptists are real bad about having a table right here in front of the pulpit. And so when they have offerings, they'll have people come up and just lay their money on the table. And you can see who threw down a $100 bill, and you can see who threw down a $1. They have their reward. What you give is between you and God. It ain't between you and me. Now, we have some non-resident members that send their money directly to me, but you don't know how much they sent, do you? I'm not going to share that with anybody. If I did, I'd be stealing their reward from them. You give to God, God rewards you. That's why we do it that way, so that we can take care of that. And God is well pleased when we give abundantly. Mark chapter 12. Verses 41 through 44. And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto them his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all of her living. You got to trust God a lot to give him everything you got. And notice, she's in the Bible. What kind of an honor is that? To be listed in the red writing in the Bible. God's pleased with that. Look at Luke chapter 6 and verse 38. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom, for with the same measure that ye meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 10. Hebrews 6 and verse 10. For God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which ye have showed toward his name, in that ye have ministered to the saints, and do minister. And Hebrews 13 and verse 16. But to do good and to communicate, forget not. For with such sacrifices God is well pleased. And that communication refers to giving. That's one of the things that we're called upon to do, to give. You know, I was talking to some people today about, you know, sometimes we have to do things that we don't really want to do. There have been times when I'll put the blame on me, where I'll have to do something with Wendy's family and I don't really want to. But I'll do it for her sake. And Elder Gerald taught me one time over in Romans chapter 12, there's a passage that I refer to a lot, or I think of a lot. And that's the one that talks about, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men, as much as lieth in you. And it also tells you that the way to get along in this world is that when it comes to your enemies, do better to them than they do to you. Don't go back at them with the same hatred they throw at you. If a man thirsts, give him something to drink. Heap coals of fire upon their head. In other words, you take somebody that's throwing hatred at you and be nice to them, it'll drive them nuts. It'll drive them out of their minds. Give. Be nice. Life will be better for you. And God is well pleased in it. We should always be ready to give to others for the purposes of God, even if we're taken advantage of in it. God sees that we were trying to do what was right. Right? This church fell into that hole one time, but that doesn't mean that people didn't receive blessings as a result of it. They did. They received their blessings, even though the intent was dishonorable. Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 13. So I land right on the passage I was just talking about. How about that? Let love be without dissimulation. Abhor that which is evil. Cleave to that which is good. Be kindly affectionate one another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, distributing to the necessity of the saints, given to hospitality. Now, this isn't in the note, but let me read this next part, because this is what I was just referring to. Bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another, mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. You know, there comes a point where it doesn't lie within you anymore. And if it doesn't, then you got to go as far as you can go, and then that's it. Right? But go as far as you can. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. It'll drive him nuts. It will drive him absolutely nuts. If he's trying to destroy you and you're nice to him, it will drive him crazy. Works better than getting in an argument with him. Just be nice to him. Love him into misery. And then you can go home and talk to yourself. But that's what God says do. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. So we should always be ready to give. Look at Romans chapter 15, verses 25 through 27. Romans 15:25. But now I go unto Jerusalem to minister unto the saints. For it hath pleased them of Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor saints which are at Jerusalem. It hath pleased them verily, and their debtors they are. For if the Gentiles have been partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister unto them in carnal things. You see, the Jews came along and gave us a Bible. Those of us that minister to you in spiritual things, we live of the carnal things you give us, because I can't go to Publix and buy corn with a Bible verse. It doesn't work. Right? If I could, y'all would be down at Publix buying corn. Then I wouldn't be able to buy any because it'd all be gone by then. But you see, my job is to work within this Bible and bring you something to eat every week. Now, in that thought, there's a couple of things I want you to see. First, I want you to turn to Mark chapter 10, because giving to the poor is an act of discipleship. It is something that we should strive to be able to do. We're always going to have poor with us. We will never, I don't care what new deal you want to come up with, it ain't going to work. There will always be poor folk. And there will always be poor folk within the church. And it's our responsibility to try to help take care of those people if need be. That's an act of discipleship. But there's some provisions on it. Mark chapter 10 and verse 21, dealing with the rich young ruler. Where it says, "And Jesus, beholding him, loved him, and said unto him, One thing thou lackest. Go thy way, and sell whatsoever thou hast, and give to the poor." You see, it's our response. He was calling him to discipleship and told him to give to the poor. "And thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come take up the cross and follow me." So that's something that we should do. That's an act of discipleship, to help the poor. But giving to the poor is to be regulated according to need, not according to want. All right? Deuteronomy chapter 15. This goes all the way back. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 7 through 8. "If there be among you a poor man, of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not harden thine heart, nor shut thine hand from thy poor brother. But thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth." You see, it's regulated according to need, what they need. And giving to the poor is not designed to exempt them from working for income if they're able to work for income. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10. Now, if somebody can't work, that's different. But if they can, then God requires them to work. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10. "For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat." Right? If you're able to work, you have to work. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8. "But if any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel." Folks, this applies to ministers as well as unto you. My responsibility to provide for my house. I have to provide for my house, either out of the offerings that you give me or from going out and working a job. But my requirement is to provide for my family, first and foremost. Okay? Now, giving to a minister is designed to exempt him from having to work another job for income. That's the idea behind it. That's how God runs his kingdom. You know, the United States of America is a kingdom. Would you agree with that? It's a government. How does the government fund itself? Want to take a guess? You're going to file a report here on April 15th, if not sooner, and you're going to write a big fat check to Uncle Sam to help them support that kingdom, are you not? It's called taxes. God has a kingdom in this world too. How is his kingdom provided for? From the citizens of the kingdom, by putting money in a box. Same thing. It's the same type of thing. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Verses 6 through 14. Or I only and Barnabas, have we not power to forbear working? Who goeth a warfare any time in his own charges? Who planteth a vineyard and eateth not of the fruit thereof? Or who feedeth the flock and eateth not of the milk of the flock? Say I these things as a man, or saith not the law the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Or saith he it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes no doubt this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and he that thresheth in hope should be partaker of his hope. If we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things? If others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? Nevertheless, we have not used this power, but suffer all things, lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ. Do ye not know that they which minister about holy things live of the things of the temple? And they which wait at the altar are partakers with the altar. You think about this. You know, people would bring lambs, and they would bring different animal sacrifices, and they would be slaughtered, and then they would be butchered, in essence, and then they would be laid on the fire. What happened to them after that? You know what happened to them? That's what the priests ate. That was their substance. The people that brought the sacrifices fed the people that did the service of God. That's what Paul's saying here. Those that served at the altar ate of the altar. Now in the Old Testament, if you had an apple orchard, you'd bring 10% of your apples in. Well, who ate the apples? The priests. That's how they lived. That's the way it's always been done. Even so hath God ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. So, giving to a minister is designed to exempt him from having to work another job. And this is another area where primitive Baptists are horrible about this. In fact, the Las Vegas Primitive Baptist Church, that group that used to be us, that split off and became a Primitive Baptist Church, they were actually bragging that in the Primitive Baptists, they didn't have to pay them because the guys all worked jobs and then preached on the weekends. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a Primitive Baptist service, but it's some of the most shallow preaching that you will ever hear you don't get fed from that stuff. You really don't. They meander around and they don't. Well, think about it. Ask this guy right here, who in a couple of weeks is going to stand up and deliver a message to you, and ask him how much work goes into that. If you work a job 50, 60 hours a week, how hard is it to put a sermon together? It's tough, isn't it? It's rough. It's rough to work a job and try to put a sermon together 4 times a year, right? What about 52 times a year? And so here's the rule. Since I'm required to provide for my family, whether a church provides for me or not, my number one rule is I have to provide for my family. So if I have to go get a job, here's a Bible verse for you. Galatians 6:5, be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. You want to give God leftovers? You know what you're going to get in return? You're going to get leftovers. You're going to get what's left over after I work 40 hours a week in a secular profession. And it ain't going to be much. It's God's plans that ministers are supported by those whom they minister to. You see, this goes against this idea of these big, huge corporate churches that they pool their funds and then pay the minister a salary. No, we're paid by the people that we minister to. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 6. Let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. Philippians chapter 4, verses 14 through 19. Notwithstanding, ye have well done that ye did communicate with my affliction. Now ye Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. For even in Thessalonica you sent once and again unto my necessity, not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. But I have all and abound, I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice accepting, well-pleasing to God. But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. You see, this is a reciprocal arrangement. The people that are ministered to minister to the man that ministers to them, and God rewards them for their faithfulness for ministering to the man that God sent to minister to them. You see how that works? 1 Timothy chapter 5. Verses 17 through 19. Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and doctrine. You have a minister that's lucky enough to work full-time in the ministry, take good care of him. You don't want to lose him. Even if you don't like him, you don't want to lose him. Take care of the man. Okay? In Ephesians chapter 4, and I know I'm running over. I'm starting to see eyes glaze over. I'll try to wrap this up as quick as I can. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good. Why? That he may have to give to him that needeth. One of the main considerations of one of the objectives of your working in a job is to help others in need. It's not all about helping yourself, folks. It's about helping others. And if you look at Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 2, it says, and walk in love as Christ also hath loved us, and hath given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. Your eternal salvation you received as a gift. And God asks that you give back. What's that worth to you? Is it worth 10%? Is it worth 2%? What's it worth to you? Think about that. Considering that giving of our substance is a sacrifice that honors God, he's pleased by it. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 15 and 16. By him, therefore, let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. But to do good and to communicate, forget not, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. That communication ain't talking about talking. communication is talking about giving. Now, giving is to be done, I'll hit a couple of points here and wrap this up. Giving is to be done as you have opportunity, okay? As you have opportunity. There are some times when you just don't have the opportunity. We have a long-haul truck driver sitting in the room, and some Sundays he's not here. He doesn't have the opportunity to put money in the box when he's not here, right? So what do you do in that case? Well, you lay it by your side and you bring it in when you do have opportunity. When you have opportunity, you bring it. If you don't have opportunity, you don't. God's not going to require you, if you're not there, to be able to give. We have the group in Las Vegas that have a Folgers coffee can, and people put money in there, and once a month they take that out and turn it into a money order and mail it to me. Okay? We have other non-resident members. Some of them just put money in an envelope and mail it to me. And by the way, I've never missed one. Not one of them has gotten lost in the mail. They take the position that if God wants them to have the money, He's going to get it. And I've gotten it. But we have a group of people in Phoenix, Arizona, that give when they come to Las Vegas. That's every 3 months. What do they do in the meantime? Well, they lay it by their side and keep it there. They don't have the opportunity. Don't have the opportunity to give. When they have the opportunity, they give. Okay? So if you're out of town, don't get flustered over it. If something happens and you don't have, I mean, I've had people that have come to me and said, well, I forgot, I'll bring it by the house. You don't have to bring it by the house, bring it next week. You know, don't get all flustered, just be careful. If you don't have the opportunity, you don't have it. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 10. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein ye were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity. You see, they were careful to put it aside, but they didn't have the opportunity to give it. So they just let it build up by their side until they had the opportunity. Okay? You're to give as you have opportunity. Galatians chapter 6. And verse 10, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. Okay, God's not going to blame you for not doing something if you didn't have the opportunity to do it. Now, I want you to turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and this will almost be our last passage. I got to be careful here, because then I'll rattle on for an hour and Wendy will get mad at me. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 8 says, I speak not by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of others, and to prove the sincerity of your love. And verse 24, it says, wherefore show ye to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. And what he's talking about in this passage is taking a collection for the poor saints. One of the things that giving does is proves the sincerity of your love. Who does it prove it to? Doesn't prove it to me, because I don't know what you're giving, but it proves it to God. You go to God and you tell Him you love Him, but then you withhold from Him. Think of that in human terms. I tell my wife I love her, but then I don't ever do anything to show it. Does that prove that I love her? No. It's the things I do to show her that I love her that speak so much louder than my words. Right? In verse 19, 2 Corinthians 8:19, it says, and not that only, but who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us with this grace, which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord and declaration of your ready mind. You see, this declares that you have a ready mind. It shows God that you're paying attention, that you have a ready mind, that you're careful to do what you're supposed to do. In 2 Corinthians, stay here because we're going to come right back, but 2 Corinthians chapter 9 And verse 13 says, whilst by the experiment of this ministration they glory God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal distribution unto them and to all men. It shows that you're under subjection to the gospel, that you truly believe what it is that you profess to believe. Who was the Dallas Cowboy? Was it Jimmy Johnson, Dallas Cowboy coach, who used to say you have to walk the walk? If you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. Doing what you know you're supposed to do proves to God that you're not just walking the walk, that you're not just talking the talk, that you're actually walking the walk. It proves that you truly do love Him, that you truly are in subjection. Not only that, in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 12, it says, for the administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant also by the many thanksgivings unto God. And in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 16, it says, for even in Thessalonica you sent once and again unto my necessity. And verse 18, but I have all in abound. You see, it fulfills the need for which it was given. These are some of the beneficial results of just being obedient to what God tells you to do. And it results, and this is probably the most important, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 19. And not only that, not that only, but who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us with this grace which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord. You see, it glorifies God. It glorifies God. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 12. And I know I'm reading the same verses over and over again, but I'm trying to make different points with each of them. So please bear with me. 2 Corinthians 9:12, for the administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant also by the many thanksgivings unto God, whilst by the experiment of this ministration they glorify God for your professed subjection. You see, it glorifies God when you do this. And finally, in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 8 through 11, and this will bring us back around full circle to what we started with, the fact of how a Christian survives financially by giving according to the pattern that I've laid out for you today. This is something that it does. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 8 through 11. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye always, having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. As it is written, He hath dispersed abroad, He hath given to the poor, His righteousness remaineth forever. Now he that ministereth seed to the sower both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God. And finally, back where we first started, Proverbs chapter 3. Right where we started, we're going to end. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. That's a promise from God. You be careful to take care of His work in this world, and He will be careful to take care of you and keep the devil off your back. You become negligent or careless regarding His work, that promise goes away, and you're on your own. And you do not want God to let go of the reins of the devil and let him come after you. You just don't want to have that happen. Now, this is my annual giving sermon. You probably won't hear it for another 2 years, because I do it every 2 years or whenever I feel the need. With that, I thank you for your kind and patient attention. And if it stung, remember, it's just the medicine doing the work. Let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.